In the beginning was matter. And matter begot the amoeba. The amoeba begot the worm. The worm begot the fish. The fish begot the amphibian. The amphibian begot the reptile. The reptile begot the lower mammal. The lower mammal begot the lemur. The lemur begot the monkey. The monkey begot the man who imagined God. This is the genealogy of man. That's a verbatim quote from a man named Charles Smith back in the 20s, but still encapsulates the idea of atheism, that this physical world is all that there ever was, all that there ever will be, and all that there is right now, that everything that you see is a product of blind random chance processes over multiplied millions or billions of years, and that you are here because those random chance processes somehow got together and formed your body and mind and everything about you from primordial slime. That's the idea of atheism, that there is no God. A meaning not, theism, Greek word for theos or God, not a God. Right now in the United States of America, 22 million people believe that either there is absolutely no God and they are hard-nosed atheists, or they're agnostic and they say, hey, we're about 98, 99% sure that there's not one, but we can't say it for absolute 100% sure, but we're going to behave like there's not. About 7% of the adult population right now is either atheist or agnostic. Now, to put that in a little perspective, if you're driving through Birmingham on a Friday night at about 5 o'clock or 6, you understand you've made a serious logistical miscalculation, because you don't want to be driving through Birmingham at 5 o'clock on a Friday night, because, yeah, I mean, you're talking, it is rush hour, and that hour is pretty literal, or maybe even more, and you have approximately, if you were to take all of the people in the area of Birmingham and Bessemer and the surrounding areas, Trustville, etc., you've got right at 1 million people. Now, what's fascinating about that is all of them own 2 cars, and they're driving both of them at the same time, and you don't know how that happens. But that's the case. And so you've got 1 million people in Birmingham, Alabama. Now, imagine this. Good to see you guys. Come on in. Glad you're here. Y'all come on down to the front row. There's always room on the front row, boys. Always room on the front row. Got 1 million people in Birmingham, Alabama. Now, that is 1 million people with infants and toddlers, etc. We're not talking about 1 million adults. We're talking about just 1 million people total. Now, multiply Birmingham, Alabama by 22 cities the size of Birmingham, Alabama, and it's filled, each one of those cities are filled with adults. And that's how many atheists we have in the United States of America today, atheists and agnostics. Of course, it's the most that we've ever had in the history of our country. Atheism is the fastest growing religion, put it in quotes, in the United States of America. And we are dealing with this idea of unbelief to a greater degree than we ever have before in our lives, and especially the generation that is coming up now from about 13 years old to 18 years old. Okay, now, there's another idea. You've probably heard of it too. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God hovered over the face of the waters. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God divided the light from the darkness, and the light He called day, the darkness He called night, and evening and a morning, day 1. And then subsequently, day 2, God creates the expanse, or the sky and space. Day 3, the flowers, the grass, and the trees. Day 4, sun, moon, and stars. Day 5, birds and fish. Day 6, animals and humans. And on the 7th day, He ceases His creative activity. The idea of creation, that there is a supernatural, meaning non-material God in heaven that is intelligent, all-powerful, and eternal, that spoke the world into existence. And so ultimately, those are the 2 ideas you have. That there is an intelligent, supernatural creator, or there is nothing but this physical world, and you need to decide which one of those is true. Now, here's what we're told by the modern scientific community. We're told that one of these ideas is scientific, and one of them is faith-based. Now, when they say faith-based, what they mean is not rational, it's not backed by evidence, it's not something that you can prove, it's something that, and generally speaking, they'll tell you this, it's something that gullible people accept from their leadership without critically thinking through. And they'll say that this idea of atheism is the science-based system, and this idea of creation is the faith-based, gullible, irrational system. And then they'll say, hey, don't we all want to be reasonable and science and fact and evidence-based? So what we really want to do is just look at the idea of, is there evidence for one of these two ideas? And if there is evidence, where does that evidence point? Well, I'm going to suggest to you that that evidence points overwhelmingly to the idea that there is a supernatural, all-powerful God. But what I want you to do and understand is I'm going to take the evidence that the atheistic scientific community recognizes as true, and I'm going to apply it to the idea of creation. Now, one thing that we're often told is, well, you don't even get to say the word science in the same sentence as God, because God is not a scientific idea, because you can't do an experiment on God. You can't touch, see, taste, hear, or smell God. And so if you don't have the thing that you're talking about, and you can't measure and touch and see and do things to this, whatever it is, it's not even a scientific idea. And here's why they say that. Because the idea of science has been redefined in the past 150 years to be something it never was or never was meant to be. Let me tell you what I mean. Historically, science has been the quest for the truth. And that's it. Put a period. It's been the search for the truth. In fact, that's what the word means. It's a Latin word that means to study and find the truth. Now, in the last 150 years, that definition has been changed, and they say it is a quest for naturalistic explanations for things. And so they have defined out of the picture any supernatural activity. Used to, it was, we want to find the best answer. Now it is, we want to find the best answer as long as it's not supernatural. Now, let me tell you how that runs into a real problem. You guys understand forensics, you understand forensic science, where you come on a scene and you don't know who or what did the thing, and you need to find how this happened. Suppose that you go up to a person and the person says, I'd like to commission you to do something for me. We have found an apple, and the apple has a big chunk out of it. And we want you to arrive at how you think this chunk came out of that. We want you just to find the best answer you can, except you can't say that a human bit it. You can give us any answer you want, but you can't say it was a human. Okay, so you find the apple, and it's in a backyard of a house. Well, you pick that apple up, and you look, and there's some marks in it, look like bite marks, and you think, well, you know, those look remarkably like human bite marks. And so you go knock on the door of the person who owns the yard, and he comes out and says, yes, can I help you? You say, hey, I'm trying to find out how this chunk got out of this apple, and I just wanted to know, do you happen to have your dental records on you? Now, this is theoretical, work with me, but he says, yeah, I've got my dental records on me. So he pulls them right out of his back pocket and hands them to you. And you take his dental records and you compare his dental records and his tooth pattern to the bite mark. And it matches perfectly. So you say, okay, I'm trying to find out how this chunk came out of the apple. I've got some dental records that match the pattern of this seemingly bite mark, and then you start taking some samples out of the apple, and sure enough, you have a sample that looks like it's saliva. You send it off to the lab, and the lab comes back and says, yes, it is. We've got a DNA match for a person with this name, and you knock back on the door, and you say, hey, I know this is kind of outlandish request, but do you happen to have your DNA records on you? He says, oh, yeah, I got those. He pulls the other pocket, pulls his DNA records out, and it matches perfectly to the saliva that you have just gotten off of the apple. So then you dust that apple for fingerprints, and sure enough, there's a print on top and a print on bottom. One of them looks like the middle finger of someone, and the other one looks like a thumb where somebody might have been holding it in their hand. Back to the door, knock on it, and you ask him, hey, would you happen to have your fingerprints? He says, oh, yeah, just so happened got these from the police department last week. So he's got them. Matches his thumbprint and his middle fingerprint. So here's what you've got now. You've got the dental records that match the bite pattern. You've got saliva that is the exact DNA match to the person that lives in the house, and you got his fingerprints. You go to the person who commissioned you to find the answer. You say, hey, I've got the answer. I believe it's this guy. And the person says, well, you know, I commissioned you to find the answer that was not a human. So whatever else evidence you got that points to the guy, that doesn't count. We're going to say that's not scientific. We're going to say that doesn't count, and you've got to come up with something else. Okay, now let's think about that. Everything points directly to the human, but you got to come up with something else. So then what do you come up with? The apple fell out of the tree and somehow got scraped on the bark, and the bark was the exact bite pattern as the person in the house, but it wasn't the guy in the house because humans can't be involved, and that saliva had some DNA that matched his, but it wasn't human DNA. It must have somehow got matched with the slug DNA and then a worm DNA that crawled across that. And you just come up with outlandish stuff. That doesn't make any sense because you have already defined out of the picture the real answer. Now, if the modern scientific world says we're going to do science and we don't want the best answer, we just want the answer that's the best as long as it's not supernatural. Okay, well, you're not getting the best answer. You're defining out of the picture what could be the best and only reasonable answer. Now then, the next thing that they tell us is, well, hold on just a second. Like I said, you can only do science on stuff you can touch, see, taste, hear, or smell, and you can't touch, see, taste, hear, or smell God, so he's not scientific. Do you know, nobody ever has said, in the real world, you only do science on stuff you can touch, see, taste, hear, or smell. In fact, forensic science is the definition of why that's wrong. Let me show you what I mean by that. You go to a beach and you see footprints on the sand. They are separated by about 24, 26 inches. Each one of those footprints has 5 toes, a heel, and an arch. There is a right foot and a left foot, and they're going down the beach. You look down the beach and you don't see a human being. And you say to yourself, well, I guess it's not a human being because I can't see a human being. I can't touch a human being. Can't physically involve myself with any human being because there's no human being on the beach, so no human being made these footprints. Well, we would never do that. In fact, anytime you arrive on a crime scene, you're trying to identify the person and or thing responsible that's not there. Now, I'm not quoting this as evidence for the existence of God, although you could if you did a little work before and showed the inspiration of the Bible to be valid and absolute fact. But I am quoting this to show you how things have been historically done. In Romans chapter 1, verse 20, the text says, for since the beginning of creation, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being under... Well, I'll stop right there. You know, sometimes God, I think, puts things that sound humorous if you really listen to them. You got to listen to them close. But now, listen to what the text says. Verse 20, God's invisible attributes are clearly seen. Well, hold on just a second. That's the definition of invisible. What does invisible mean? That when you put in front of something, invalid, what's that mean? Not valid. Incoherent, what's that mean? Not coherent. Invisible, what's that mean? Not visible. Okay, God's invisible attributes are clearly visible. That's what the text says. Well, how in the world are God's invisible attributes clearly visible? Being understood by the things which are made, even his eternal power and Godhead. Now, how do you clearly see things about God that you don't see? Oh, by the things which are made. Now, sounds kind of interesting and odd, but we do this all the time. You're now looking at the footprints on the beach. You do not see a person. You never say, I don't think a person made these because I can't see the person. You never do that. In fact, there are some things you can know about the person, aren't there? Number one, just look at the footprints and count how many toes are in the prints on the beach. 5 on each foot. Can you know how many toes the person that left these footprints have on their feet without ever seeing their feet? They got 5 toes on each foot. They got 10 toes. Can you tell what kind of arch they have? based on the footprint that is left in the beach? Okay, you've never seen their arch. You've never seen their foot. But you can tell their arch based on the footprint. You know, if you have the right equipment and the right measurements, you can tell approximately how tall this person is based on how far apart their footprints are. You know, 24 inches gives them about 5'8", 5'10". You get a little bit further than that, 36 inches or so. You can get up to Terrence Dendy level up there. Or Craig Ratliff level. You look at what, 6'7", 6'8". If you got even more specialized equipment and you knew the density of the sand and the depth of the print, you could come up with approximately how much the person weighs. So here's what I know. They got 5 toes on each one of their feet, right and left. I know their arch. I know they have a heel. I know approximately how tall they are, and I can tell you approximately how much they weigh. And yet I've never seen the person. Now, what have we just done? The person's invisible attributes, you've never seen them, are clearly seen from the thing that you have seen. We can know their weight and their height and what's on their feet. And we've never seen them. So when you come to the text where it says God's invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things which are made, are there some things we can see about God that even though we don't see God, we can know it for a scientific fact? Yeah, there are. And so work with me. I'm going to give you some examples of this. We're going to deal with some scientific laws. First law that you know is the most fundamental scientific law in existence right now is the law of cause and effect. What caused that? That's a good question. It's what we would like to know. There's some scientific stuff involved in the displacement of when lightning strikes, that it causes a gap in the atmosphere, and the thunder is caused by that gap in the atmosphere. Anyway, we won't get into that, but cause and effect. Cause and effect says this: for every material effect you see in the universe or anywhere, there is a cause that was greater than it and that came before it. Cause and effect says every material effect you see, there's a cause that was greater than it, came before it. Now, right now, we're told that 13.82 billion years ago, there was a tiny singularity that was smaller than a period at the end of a sentence in a book that exploded 13.82 billion years ago into the universe that we see. That's what we're told caused the universe from an atheistic scientific perspective. Now, let's look at that idea of cause and effect. Suppose I'm talking to you, and all of a sudden, now this is theoretical, work with me, but I'm talking and you are sitting on the edge of your seats. You are listening to every word I have to say. You're not thinking, I'm glad this is the last lesson at Oath this afternoon. You're not thinking about the cheesecake that's left in the kitchen there. You're not, now, like I said, it's hypothetical, work with. Let's say you're thinking about the lesson. And all of a sudden, this songbook shoots across the room going 100 miles an hour, smashes into the back window, busts the window into 562 different little shards of glass. Your eyes get as big as saucers. You turn around to me and you say, Kyle, what caused that? And I say with a smirk, no, nothing. Sometimes songbooks just shoot themselves across rooms at 100 miles an hour and crash into windows, and that's just how things happen. And you kind of chuckle and think, you said, no, Kyle, really, what caused that? And I said, no, really, sometimes songbooks just shoot themselves across rooms at 100 miles an hour. And you say, well, Kyle, hold on. No, seriously, quit joking around. What caused that? If I were to try to stand here and tell you in any type of seriousness that songbooks spontaneously, with no cause whatsoever, shoot themselves across rooms at 100 miles an hour, you would literally think that something was very wrong with me. Okay, so here's the question. Where does a universe like the one we have come from? We're told that it came from that tiny little singularity that exploded. And then you ask the real simple question. Okay, where did that little singularity come from? Where did it originate? Now, there is a man, he has passed on now. His name is Stephen Hawking. Stephen Hawking was supposed to be the world's leading theoretical physicist. I'd say many of you, it's interesting, here's what I mean by that. If I were to say how many of you know any theoretical physicists, most of us know none except maybe Stephen Hawking. He's the only theoretical physicist that most any of us know. He had Lou Gehrig's disease, was in a wheelchair, was on several History Channel shows on what Curiosity, one of the shows was, and he was at the time recognized as the world's leading theoretical physicist. Now, he wrote a book titled The Grand Design, and the intent of this book was to prove scientifically that you don't need a God. That was the whole point of it. And they said, okay, well, how do you get the original stuff? And here's what he said. He said, well, I know that's a challenge to us as atheists. And he says, and as you look at it, stars don't spontaneously pop into existence. They have to have a cause. He said, black holes don't spontaneously pop into existence. They have to have a cause. But entire universes do. He said, you know, sometimes universes just pop into existence from absolutely nothing. Do you understand that that is the worst example of a scientific explanation that anybody has ever presented? Hey, we know how matter works. We know that all material effects have to have a cause that came before them, but we can't give you one, so we're going to tell you that our universe broke every single legitimate scientific law, the most fundamental one in existence, the law of cause and effect, and popped into existence from nothing. We're going to tell you that with a straight face and expect you to believe that an entire universe can pop into existence from nothing. You say, okay, well, just give me an example of where any material has ever done that. We don't have one. Just give me an example of any scientific, legitimate calculation that will get that. We don't have one. So why in the world would you say that an entire universe pops into existence from nothing? I mean, well, if it didn't, then you'd have to go to a different kind of explanation. No, okay, I want the explanation that answers the question without defining. Well, I mean, if we don't say it pops into existence out of nothing, then we have to say that there's something supernatural. And we've already said you can't say there's something supernatural, so we're just going to have to give you the ridiculous idea that pops into existence from nothing. But let's talk about who's scientific then. Because if science is the search for the real cause of something, and there's no way that a songbook shoots itself across a room spontaneously, then there's absolutely no scientific way that an entire universe pops into existence from nothing. And yet that's the only alternative to the idea that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. You see, in Romans chapter 1, the Bible says, here's what you can see from the things that are created. The first thing you can see is God's eternal power. What's that mean? There's always had to be something here, and it wasn't matter. It has to be something eternal. Now, here's the second aspect of the universe as it relates to the law of cause and effect. The law of cause and effect says that the effect has to be smaller than the cause. The cause has to be greater than the effect. Now, work with me and see what happens here. Back to the illustration. We're back to our songbook. Somehow it has been put back on the podium now, and you are listening again. All of a sudden, the songbook shoots across the room, 100 miles an hour, crashes into the window behind you. You look at me, eyes big as saucers. You say, Kyle, what caused that? This time I do not give you the ridiculous idea that it just spontaneously shot itself across the room at 100 miles an hour. I tell you what happened. While you were sitting there listening, a speck of dust landed on the end of that songbook, and the force of that speck of dust catapulted the songbook across the room at 100 miles an hour. Okay, here's the problem. I just gave you a cause that came before it. But it's not what? It's just not big enough. It doesn't give you the power. It doesn't have the energy to do what happened, what got done. It is not big enough to get a songbook across the room at 100 miles an hour. So we're told that this singularity that popped into existence out of nothing, violating the law of cause and effect, then somehow brought the universe into existence that we live in. You know, let's just take a breath a minute and ask ourselves, okay, this tiny ball of stuff has to account for a universe that is how big? I mean, how big is our universe? Well, we won't go into a whole lot of it, but we live in the Milky Way galaxy, my favorite galaxy to live in, because, I mean, incidentally, number one, it's the only place where anybody's ever seen any kind of life and will probably ever. But number two, it's named after a candy bar. And the rest of the galaxies do not have candy bar names. they have names like Galaxy GX302 and Andromeda and stuff like that. I mean, the Milky Way galaxy, that's where we live. It's an exciting galaxy to live in. We have a solar system where we have a sun that's about 93 million miles from us, and that sun is about 1 million times the size of the Earth, meaning you could take 1 million Earths and fit them in the sun. And the sun is a star, a very middle-sized star. Well, what we understand is the Milky Way galaxy, when you look up at night, you can see all those stars, and there's a swath of stars that's so dense, it gives the atmosphere a milky-looking character or quality. And that's where we get the idea of Milky Way, that it's milky because there's so many stars there. And they're even, you can't even see them individually, there's so many. Here's what they said several years ago. They said there are about 100 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. 100 billion. Okay, that's a lot. How long would it take you to count to 100 billion? Let's say you get up every day, you count to 10,000. Now, I don't know why anybody would want to wake up and count to 10,000, but you could if you wanted to. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Every single number counts as a star. Now, when my oldest son was little, Drew, he's 19 now, about to go off to college, but when he was little, he was probably about 5. He would get up before me and my wife, last times on a Saturday, and one Saturday he got up and we said, Drew, what'd you do this morning? He said, well, I counted. I said, what'd you count? He said, nothing, just counted. I said, okay, cool. What'd you count to? He said, 3,000. Ever got up on a Saturday morning? Light streaming through the blinds a little bit, and you think, looks like a great day to count, boys. I mean, and just counted to 3,000. Well, I haven't. That's never been something I've wanted to do. However, after I have done some lessons like this around to thousands and thousands of kids, I've had some little people come up to me, 7, 8, 9-year-olds, and get a little sheepish grin. Had this little girl come up to me. She said, I do that. I said, it was after the lesson. I said, what do you do exactly? She said, oh, I count like that. I said, okay, well, hey, let's say you want to get up and count to 10,000 every day. Okay? If that's what you want to do, more power to you. And every one of those numbers represents a star. Sun is a middle-sized star. You can put 1 million Earths inside the sun. Some of the stars are 2,100 times bigger than the sun. So you can put 2,100 suns in some of the stars at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Okay, let's say 14. Number 14 I just counted is 2,100 times bigger than the sun. That means you can put 2.1 billion Earths inside that one star. Now, count to 10,000 every day, how long is it going to take you to count to 100 billion? Well, not 100 years, not 1,000 years, not 2,000 years or 10,000 years. You understand it's going to take you 27,000 years. Actually, it's something like 27,430, somewhere around there. It's going to take you that many years to count to 100 billion, counting 10,000 every day. And that's the number of stars about 8 years ago they told us that were in the Milky Way galaxy. And then they said, we got a problem. Let me tell you what I've got. I've got a 2008 GMC Sierra that is a amazing vehicle. It's got like 255,000 miles on it, and it drives perfect. But my wife and I have a different idea of what a clean vehicle is. And I always grew up thinking that a clean vehicle was a vehicle in which you did not have to move trash out of any seats for the original number of occupants to be seated in your vehicle. So if it seats 5 and you don't have to move trash for 5 people to get in, clean. My wife has a different definition of clean than I do, and her definition is your clothes don't need to get dirty when you sit down in the vehicle. That's kind of her definition of clean. And the other day, her vehicle, her pilot wasn't inoperable. It was doing something. I don't know where it was. And I said, hey, babe, we can take my truck. So got in my truck. She said, Kyle, we cannot take your truck to worship anymore on Sundays. We just can't do it. I said, babe, why? I drive this truck all the time. She said, my clothes literally get dirty when I sit in your vehicle. It's the farm truck. We do all kinds. Guess what I learned the other day? It was amazing. This is amazing. Okay, behind your steering wheel, there's this stuff that if you wipe it off, there's information behind it. You can tell how fast you're going. It's this plexiglass thing that you can wipe off, Tells you how many miles you've gone. You got a odometer. It might even have a tachometer. It's awesome. I had hardly seen what was behind my steering wheel, and I decided I'm washing my truck. I'm going to clean it all out. So I took the little wipes in, wiped that off. It's like a brand new vehicle look. Little light coming in. You know what they said about 8 years? They said, we've been looking out in the Milky Way galaxy, and we said there were 100 billion stars, which takes you 27,000 years, counting 10,000 a day to get to. Wrong. We weren't calculating for space dust. If you wipe that lens off in a kind of figurative sense, and you calculate for how much dust is in space, we were wrong. There's actually about 300 to 400 billion stars in the Milky Way galaxy. Oh, we're off. And now it doesn't take you 27,000 years to count the number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. It takes you 54,000. It takes you 71,000. No, not 81,000. It takes you, you're talking over 100,000 years almost to count the number of stars in the Milky Way galaxy. And that's one galaxy. Okay, so let's do this all over then. How many galaxies we got? Okay, look. In the Milky Way galaxy, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 gives you a number for every star. We said there were 100 billion. No, there's actually maybe 4 times that. And now we just learned that there are 100 billion galaxies. Some of them are huge galaxies that are many times bigger than the Milky Way galaxy. And what do we need to account for an effect that big? Something bigger. A singularity the size of a period at the end of a sentence is not a scientific explanation for a universe that is 93 billion light years across. Let me tell you what 93 billion means. It means if you could travel the speed of light at 186,312 miles per second, 7 times around the equator of the earth in a second, and you started on this end, it would take you 93 billion years traveling 186,000 miles a second to get to the other side. That's how big our universe is. And we're told that the scientific explanation by the most brilliant people in the world is they'll look you in the face and say, and that came from a tiny singularity, smaller than a period at the end of a sentence. Okay, you know why scientifically that's a problem? Because it does not correspond correctly to the law of cause and effect, which says for every material effect you see in this universe, you have to have a cause that came before it, and that was greater than it. We've already established that to come before it, you've got to have something eternal. Now remember what Romans chapter 1 said. From the beginning of creation, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things which are made, even his eternal, what's the next part of that? Power. Even his eternal power and Godhead. So number one, we find that he's got to be eternal. The creator of the universe has to be eternal. Number two, he's got to be more powerful than anything we've ever seen. Powerful enough to blow your mind 1,000,000 billion times. And then his Godhead. Well, let's think about that just for a second. Here's another problem with the Big Bang that we know is scientifically a deal breaker. It's a Big Bang. Oh, thank you, Kyle. I always love when you give us the answer that's no real answer at all. No, it's a big explosion. Supposedly this universe got here from a large explosion. And yet, as you look at the universe, it is perfectly calibrated for one singular idea. Humans to live on planet Earth. Now, the atheistic scientists hate to admit it, but they say, guys, we got a situation here where it looks like the planet Earth is in a Goldilocks swath of space, and planet Earth is a Goldilocks planet. And you say, well, what do you mean by a Goldilocks planet? They said, well, it's exactly perfect for humans to live on planet Earth. Now, let me, just ask you a quick question. What happens when you blow stuff up? Well, I guess you probably know this. You got a 16-year-old. He says, Mom, I'd like to go to the movies. She says, okay, no problem. What time you want to go? He said, I'd like to go about 7. She said, okay, just one stipulation. You got to clean your room. I've seen your room lately, and it's been about a week before you've cleaned it, and you're going to have to clean your room before you go to the movies. He says, okay, no problem. 5:30 rolls around. She says, son, have you cleaned your room yet? He says, no, not yet, but I'll get to it. She's thinking, I know how messy it is. If you're going to do it right, you better get on it. He waits about 30 more minutes, 6 o'clock. She says, hey, have you cleaned your room? He said, nah, I haven't quite cleaned it yet. 6:30 rolls around. She says, I guess you're not going to the movies. He said, why, Mom? I thought we had a deal. She said, yeah, we had a deal. You clean your room. I've seen your room. It looked like a tornado hit it, and there's no way you're going to get it done before you need to leave for the movies. He said, Mom, I got it under control. About 10 till 7 rolls around. She watches her son go upstairs. He opens the door, walks in, closes the door, grabs everything he has in his room on the floor and everywhere, piles it in a huge pile, pulls out a stick of dynamite, shoves it under there, lights it, walks out. I know, it worked even better, didn't it? I always, when I do that, I always try to kind of blow it up into the microphone so it gets you the blow-up sound. Very much like the large firework that we ignited at Joe Collins' house last night that sounded like something nuclear. But anyway, all right, so he blows it up. He blows it up. The mom is frantic. She rushes up. She throws open the door, looks in, and what does she see? All the clothes that needed hanging up in that explosion somehow found hangers and are now hanging in color-coordinated order in the closet. All the gadgets and gizmos that needed to be stashed on the table are now stashed perfectly where they need to be. The shoes are matched. The socks have been put together, and in the course of the explosion, they were put together with perfect matches, folded, and deposited in the drawer that they needed to go into, along with all the T-shirts and other folded garments, and that's what happens when you blow stuff up. Well, that's not true. I just didn't have enough explosive power. You just needed 2 sticks of dynamite. You just didn't blow it up enough times. You just needed to blow it up 5 times. Here's what you know. Explosions never cause order. And yeah, I'm just going to give you this one stat. I literally have hours of material on this, but here's this one stat. There are 4 forces in the universe right now that hold everything together. There's the strong atomic force, the weak atomic force, the electromagnetic force, and the force of gravity. Now, think about it like this. If you had a room that had thousands of knobs, and they all had to be turned to very precise positions in order for life and human life to be available, to even have a possibility on planet Earth. They all got to be turned to the exact right thing. Now, here's what I mean when I say the exact right thing. The force of gravity and electromagnetic force, they are calibrated to such a degree that if either one of them were off by a tiny fraction, the forces in the universe would never allow life to be here. Now, what's the fraction? You're looking at, let's say you have a knob and it's got 1,000 points that you could click. Okay? Is 1,000 the fraction? Okay, no, it's, all right, 0.1 means 1/10 of something. 0.01, 100th. 0.0001, well, that's what 1/10,000th now, if you have 3 zeros. Then 0.00001, 100,000 of 1. That means if you had a knob and it had 100,000 little clicks, then this one would have to be on one specific one, and this one would have to be on one specific one. 100,000 clicks. Okay, the people who are atheists, who hate the idea of a supernatural creator, they say, we don't know how this works. We don't know how this happened. But it looks like that some super intellect has monkeyed with the physics, because the electromagnetic force and the gravitational force are calibrated to a 0.000000000 out to the 40th decimal place. Look, out to the 6th is 100,000. Out to what, the 7th is 1,000,000. Out to the 8th is 10 million. You're talking about the 40th decimal place. You don't even get into numbers like that. And if one of those knobs was off by a tiny fraction, when I say tiny fraction, 40 decimal points, and we're told that happened from a huge explosion. Well, you can see the problem with that. Explosions just simply do not cause order. We'll come to the conclusion. One of my favorite ideas is the idea of design, that you can see how things operate in the material world, and you can see that there's a mind behind that. You can see a computer, you can compare it to the human brain, and you can see that the human brain is better in every capacity than a computing device that any human being's ever made. And yet, that human brain that weighs 3 pounds, that they say feels like unbaked bread dough when you touch it, Even the atheistic scientists will tell you it's the most advanced 3 pounds in the universe. We have no idea how it works. Get this stat, it's fascinating. Your human brain has more electronic connections, like computer connections. Now listen to this. I just learned this the other day. I couldn't even believe it, but it's true. Your one human brain, 1 3-pound human brain, has more connections than every personal computing device on the planet today. Get that. More than every phone and computer and router put together. If you took every smartphone, every personal computer, every router, and you counted the connections in all of those, it would not be as much as in one human brain. And of course, we don't know how in the world we get. I read a book the other day by this was an autobiography by a girl named Jill Price. And the title of it was The Woman Who Can't Forget. From the age of 14, she remembers everything she's ever done in minute detail. She's never forgotten a single thing. That means if she were here, she could tell you, every single one of you, what you were wearing today, what day it was, 30 years from now, every conversation that was had, every single person that was here, everything about the carpet, everything. She never forgets anything. Now you think about that. What would the memory capacity of a computer have to be to take high density film footage of everything for 30 years and store it and recall it immediately? And yet her brain can do that. The design in the universe is fascinating. We'll end it with this, and I think this is so appropriate, and we won't get to go into all the good examples of design, which there are so many. But in 1976, Antony Flew, who at the time was the world's leading atheist, he got his PhD from the University of Reading in England, and he wrote a paper that he presented to the C.S. Lewis Socratic Society in the 50s. It was the theocracy and falsification. And in that, he presented the paper that has been more widely, in the last 100 years, last 10 decades, more widely distributed and written on and studied than any other atheistic philosophy paper in the world ever. He is the world's, at the time was, the world's leading atheist. So he meets Thomas B. Warren, member of the Lord's Church, in Denton, Texas, for a 4-night debate. Every night it's 2 hours. Over the 4 nights, 2-hour period, so you're looking at 8 hours of a debate. He presents one singular idea in one of those that Flew has a real problem with. Thomas B. Warren puts up a hand of a prosthetic limb, an artificial hand. He says, Dr. Flew, did this artificial hand have a designer? Dr. Flew looks at it. Prosthetic limb, did it have a designer? You know, they're doing a lot of amazing things with prosthesis these days. I mean, they've got an arm that's $4 million. You can attach it to somebody's shoulder. You can literally take the nerves out of their shoulder, hook it to motors in the arm, and literally move the fingers of the prosthetic limb. Now, as I understand, when they first started this, they would tell the person to move your pinky finger. And their thumb would move, and so they had to get it calibrated right so that you understood when you say move your pinky finger, you got to think of the other finger. Amazing prosthesis. But the guy in charge of it, Dr. Kukin, said, you know, this is fascinating. The people who have these devices, they can take a jar of spaghetti with one hand, scrape out the remaining spaghetti sauce with the other hand. We've never seen anything like it. He said, but it's still clumsy. Dude, it's a $4 million arm. Still clumsy compared to what? Oh, he said it's still clumsy compared to the human hand. Thomas B. Warren put that hand up there and he said, Dr. Flew, did this prosthetic artificial hand have a designer? What's Flew got to say if he's going to have any credibility in any scientific circle ever? Yeah, you got to say it, yes. Warren puts up a picture of a human hand. He said, Dr. Flew, did this human hand have a designer? Now Flew's stuck. What's Flew got to say if he wants to remain the leading atheist in the world? He's got to say no. But you can see the illogical situation he's stuck in. So he says no. Dr. Warren says, okay, well, how'd it get there? Flew said it just grew there. Just grew. You mean to tell me there's a prosthetic limb that took hundreds of scientists, hundreds of thousands of hours to put together, cost you $4 million to put together, and it had a designer, but this human hand that is superior in virtually every single way to that prosthetic limb didn't. It got hit from a big explosion. Explosions don't do that. Okay, that was 1976, the year I was born. In 2006, Flu comes out with a book titled There Is No God. The no is marked out. There's an A above it, and the title of the book is There Is No, marked out, There Is a God, How the World's Most Notorious Atheist Became a Believer. And here's what he says. He said, it has always been my practice to follow the argument and the evidence where it leads me. He said, in 1976, I thought it led me to atheism. He said, but I made my decision too hastily, and I didn't have all of the scientific information at my hands that I do now. And he said, I was absolutely, positively wrong. He said, no thinking person who wants to be scientific and logical can maintain that there's no supernatural creator anymore. The evidence is in. The science is definitive. He said, and you can look at this physical world. You don't have to look at the Bible. You don't have to look at any other statement ever made. You can look at what you see in this physical world and know that there is a supernatural, eternal, all-powerful, intelligent creator who brought this world into existence. He said, you just follow the argument where it leads. I'm going to end with this, though. You know what was tragic? He said, okay, you believe in God. Awesome. Are you going to be a Christian? What about the next step? Are you going to say that there's a particular God? Which one's the best? You talking about the Islamic God? You talking about the Christian God? Here's what he said. He said, well, I'm old, and I probably am not going to do all the study on it. He said, it looks like to me Paul and Jesus had the best system, and I dare say that would probably be the right one, but I'm going to leave that for other people. And I'm not even going to take the next step to find out which God it is. You know, it's one thing to prove to people that there's a God. But the book of James says, you believe in God? You do well. Even the demons believe and tremble. The reason we ever even discuss the idea that there's a God is because we want you to get to the idea that that God left heaven and came to earth and died on the cross for you. Because that is where you come in contact with your Creator, and your Creator gives you hope for a better life after this. And if you stop at there's a God, then you have stopped woefully short of where your God wants you to be. And when you come to the conclusion that God exists, the next question is, what does God want from me? And I think that's the question that we all need to be asking ourselves. What's our Creator want from us? Sure have enjoyed my time with you. Hope you all have been as blessed by being here as I've been blessed by getting to be a part of it. Thank you for your encouragement in coming to listen, and really means a whole lot to see people that could have done anything they wanted to on a Saturday. You got busy lives. You got important stuff to do. And you chose to take the time out to spend an entire day, many of you with us, lots of you several hours, to study things that are important. You have set your mind on the things above this afternoon, and I sure appreciate you being here with us.